All right, so you're ready to learn about UX research. Great. Because today we're going to ditch all the common misconceptions and really get into some of the exciting stuff. You might be thinking, UX research, is that really as exciting as you say? Trust me, it is. You see, most people just think it's all about wireframes and usability testing, but there's so much more to it.
Yeah, that's true. It's a shame that most people don't know that UX research is kind of like the secret ingredient to building amazing products and experiences. And today we're going to be using this awesome guide by Eleken that explains everything about it really clearly.
And this is not going to just be some theory either. We're going to be talking about practical stuff that you can actually use whether you're a designer or not. Get ready for a crash course in what UX research really is, all the different types, and how you can use it in your own work. Oh, and I can't resist a good story, so we'll even be bringing in a classic Russian cartoon to illustrate some key concepts.
Yeah, you're talking.
So let's dive right in, shall we? First things first. What exactly is UX research? Have you ever, been stuck in a super thick fog where you literally can't see where you're going?
Oh yeah, I think we've all been there, haven't we?
Right. Well, now imagine that feeling, but now you're trying to design a product or a service. You might have a vision in mind, but without any info about your users, you're basically just stumbling around in the dark.
And Eleken nails it with their analogy to explain just how important research is to, actually find your way. They compare it to having a little firefly to guide you through that fog, helping you see what's ahead so you can make the right decisions.
And you know what that reminds me of? That classic Russian cartoon, Hedgehog in the Fog. Remember that little guy trying to make his way through all that fog? It's such a great way to visualize the uncertainty that designers face when they're working without enough information about their users.
Yeah, it's a powerful image for sure. And it really drives home the point that UX research is about, actually illuminating the path forward and not just making random yeses.
Totally. We're talking about real, structured inquiry, or to use the words of UX expert Erica Hall, systematic inquiry. It's all about gathering and analyzing data to make absolutely sure that you're building something that people actually want and need.
It's like, think of building a house. You wouldn't just start putting down bricks without any kind of blueprint, right? Well, that's what UX research does. It provides the blueprint for whatever you're designing or building.
So true. Okay, so now that we've covered the what of UX research, let's jump into the different types. Eleken breaks it down into 4 main categories: generative, descriptive, evaluative, and causal. Can you take us through what each of these is all about and how they actually fit into the whole design process?
Sure thing. Let's say you're building a brand new app, something totally innovative and new. That's where you'd start with generative research. Think of it as exploring completely uncharted territory, finding those unmet needs and pain points that your users might not even be able to put into words.
So it's like that initial exploratory phase where you're gathering intel to really nail down what the problem is that you're trying to solve.
Exactly. It's all about asking questions like, what are people struggling with? Or what kinds of opportunities are we missing?
And once you've got a handle on the problem space, that's when you move into descriptive research, right?
Right on. This is where we zoom in on your target audience. We're talking, who are they? How do they behave? What motivates them? And what are their goals? Basically, you're painting a really detailed picture of your users and how they interact with, everything around them.
So if generative research is all about defining the problem, then descriptive research is about getting to know the people who are dealing with that problem.
You got it. Now you've got a good understanding of both the problem and the people. And that brings us to the testing phase with evaluative research. This is all about getting your prototypes or whatever you're building in front of actual users and seeing how they interact with it.
So it's that reality check to make sure that your solutions are actually hitting the mark and meeting those needs that you defined earlier.
Right. Can people use your product easily and effectively? Does it solve their problem? Evaluative research is going to help you answer those make or break questions.
And then if those solutions aren't quite there yet, that's where causal research comes in.
Exactly. Now we're digging deeper. We need to understand the why behind the what. Why did someone ditch their shopping cart? Why are they having trouble completing a task? Causal research gets to the root cause of those problems, which helps you make much better design decisions.
It's like detective work, figuring out all those subtle factors that can make or break the user experience.
I like that. And this is where things get really interesting. Eleken gives a real-world example of how this all works. They're working with a messaging app called TextMagic. Their initial assumption was that adding more features would equal, happy users, which makes sense, right?
Yeah, it seems logical. More features equals happier users.
Right. But Through generative research, they discovered that people actually valued simplicity. They were totally overwhelmed by too many options and really just wanted a clean, intuitive messaging experience.
Wow, that really goes to show how important it is to actually validate your assumptions instead of just assuming things.
Absolutely. And here's the kicker. They didn't even have a huge research budget for this project. This case study, along with their work on a client management app called Griddle, really proves that you don't need a ton of resources to start uncovering these valuable insights.
So basically, even small businesses and startups can benefit from UX research.
100%. Even just a small investment in research can make a huge difference in the success of a product.
I'm starting to see the bigger picture here, but now I'm curious about the actual process. How does UX research actually play out in practice? Is it a straight line or is it more, well, I don't know, complicated?
That is a great question. And that brings us to one of the coolest things from Eleken's guide, the spiral model of UX research. So forget those straight lines. In UX research, you're going to be moving in a spiral.
A spiral? What do you mean by that?
It means that, research isn't just a one and done thing. It's this ongoing process that you weave into the entire product development life cycle.
So it's not like you do all the research up front and then just move on to designing and developing.
Exactly. With this spiral model, each loop gets you closer to finding that sweet spot, that perfect fit between what you're making and what your users need. It goes from discovery to exploring to testing and then listening, and then it loops back around to discovery, incorporating everything you've learned along the way.
So you're constantly learning and refining based on feedback.
Exactly. And the best part is that you're getting that user feedback at every stage of the process, so you can be sure that you're actually making something that people actually want.
I'm really starting to see how this spiral model can keep you on track, and make sure you don't go too far down the wrong path.
Exactly. And you can actually visualize this process too. Imagine like a timeline of your product development. That initial spark of an idea, all the way to actually launching the thing. Well, all those research phases are woven into that timeline, forming a spiral that gets tighter and tighter as you refine your product based on all that juicy user feedback.
Oh, wow. So it's like building a feedback loop right into the design process.
You got it. That flexibility is what makes this spiral model so powerful. It gives you the freedom to adjust as you go, which ultimately reduces risk and increases impact.
Okay, so now that we're clear on the types of research and how it actually works, I'm curious about the actual methods and tools. I mean, there's just so much out there that it can feel kind of overwhelming to know where to even begin. What are some of the most common methods people actually use in UX research?
And that's where Eleken's guide is really, really helpful. They cover a whole bunch of different methods, including some real gems that might surprise you.
Ooh, let's save those super secret methods for a little later. Can you first give us a rundown of the most popular ones?
Of course. We'll definitely dig into these more later, but here's a sneak peek. One method that's super cool is something called diary studies. It's like getting a little window into your users' everyday lives and how they actually experience things over a period of time.
Oh, I like that. Tell me more.
Then you've got ethnographic research, which is kind of like being an anthropologist who's studying a totally new culture. You basically immerse yourself in your user's world, observing how they behave and interact in their natural habitat.
That sounds so fascinating.
Right. Then there's some more technical methods, like mouse tracking and eye tracking, which can actually reveal what's grabbing people's attention on screen.
I bet that can lead to some pretty surprising discoveries.
It definitely can. And of course, we can't forget about interviews, which are a UX research classic for a reason. It's all about having those one-on-one conversations, really diving into your users' thoughts, feelings, and what makes them tick.
I love that each method gives you this totally different angle for getting to know your users.
Exactly. And the coolest part is there's a perfect method out there for every stage of the UX research process, whether you're just starting out with a brand new idea or you're fine-tuning something that already exists.
Okay, you've got me hooked. I'm ready to uncover those surprise methods a little later in our deep dive.
Trust me, you won't be disappointed. But for now, let's move on and chat about all those tools that can help you gather and analyze this goldmine of user data.
Okay, let's do it. I'm always up for adding some new tricks to my research toolbox.
Perfect. Get those notepads ready. We're about to jump into a whole world of tools that can make your research life easier and your insights, well, sharper. We're talking about everything from tracking those website visits to actually seeing how people are behaving on your site.
Yeah.
Think of it like getting superpowers for understanding your audience.
I'm all ears. So let's start with the basics. What are some of the must-have tools for gathering all that quantitative data? The hard numbers that tell you how people are actually using your product.
Well, you can't really talk about website analytics without mentioning the big kahuna Google Analytics. It's like the powerhouse for tracking website traffic, what people are doing on your site, and all sorts of helpful metrics that'll give you a clear picture of how people are interacting with it.
So it's like getting a bird's eye view of how your website's doing.
Exactly. You can see where your traffic is coming from, which pages they're visiting, how long they're hanging out on each page, and so much more.
Wow, that's a gold mine. But what about those qualitative insights? Like the why behind those numbers.
And for that, there's a really cool tool called Hotjar. It gives you things like heat maps and actual recordings of user sessions, so you can actually see what people are doing on your site in real time.
Oh, wow. So you can actually see where people are clicking, scrolling, and maybe even where they get stuck.
You got it. It's like having X-ray vision into user behavior.
Yeah.
You can spot usability problems, see what's catching people's eye, and uncover those hidden patterns that you just can't get from numbers alone.
That's pretty incredible. Okay, so now we've got tools for gathering data, but what about keeping it all organized and actually working together with our team?
Well, for documentation and collaboration, you really can't go wrong with the amazing duo of Notion and Google Workspace. They're like the Batman and Robin of research organization, giving you everything you need for taking notes, managing tasks, and sharing files.
So we're talking about keeping all your research findings, notes, and ideas in one central place where everyone on your team can access them and actually work together.
That's it. And the best part is they both play really well with other tools, which makes it so much easier to streamline your workflow.
Great. So those are perfect for general research, but what about tools specifically for usability testing?
Well, if you're all about testing how easy your designs are to use, then Maze is your new best friend. It lets you create and run user tests remotely, getting feedback from actual users on how easy it is to use your product.
So you can actually see where people are struggling, what features are confusing them, and how they're tackling different tasks.
Exactly. And Maze is awesome because it gives you all these helpful metrics and reports, so you can easily see what's working and what needs tweaking.
That is so helpful. Okay, and finally, what about tools for visual collaboration and brainstorming?
Well, in the design world, Miro and Figma are total rock stars. They're both insanely powerful tools for visual collaboration, letting you brainstorm ideas, create user flows, wireframes, and even present your research findings in a way that's actually engaging to look at.
Oh, wow. So you can use them to really bring your research to life and make it more impactful for your team.
Absolutely. And while they're super popular with designers, even those of us who aren't design savvy can totally benefit from their user-friendly interfaces and collaborative features.
This is fantastic. It's like having this whole treasure chest of UX research tools at our fingertips.
That's what I'm saying. And we're going to be diving deeper into each of these tools and how to actually use them later on. But for now, just know that there's a tool out there for every stage of the UX research journey, and you don't need to be a tech whiz to figure them out.
I love that. Okay, before we get to those top secret methods you mentioned, let's take a quick breather and review what we've learned so far.
All right, time for a quick recap. So we started with the big question. What is UX research? We talked about its purpose and all the different types. Then we went into the how, that whole spiral model, and how research isn't just a one-time thing.
And we even got a sneak peek at some of those go-to methods and tools like trusty Google Analytics and that cool tool Maze.
We're laying a solid foundation here. Now get ready to have your mind blown as we delve into those unexpected UX research methods, the ones that are going to make you say, wait, you can do that.
I can't wait. Stay tuned, everyone, because things are about to get really, really interesting. Okay, so are you ready to finally uncover those surprising UX research methods? Get ready to be amazed because we're going way beyond your typical surveys and focus groups.
We're going to be exploring some really creative and insightful ways to understand how users actually behave. These methods might seem a little unconventional, but they can really uncover those hidden gems that traditional methods just miss.
Okay, I'm intrigued. Let's start with the one that really caught my attention, diary studies. What's the deal with these?
Diary studies are kind of like, picking through a keyhole and getting to see the real lives and experiences of your users. Instead of just relying on what they remember or trying to recreate scenarios in a lab, you're getting firsthand accounts of how they're actually using your product or service, in their own environment.
It's like getting a backstage pass to see how people are really using your product in their everyday lives.
Exactly. You're basically asking people to become, like, ethnographers of their own experiences, writing down their thoughts, feelings, frustrations, and even those little workarounds they've come up with without even realizing it.
So instead of asking someone, how do you typically use this app? You're asking them to document their actual experiences over a certain period of time.
That's it.
Eh.
And the beauty of diary studies is that they can uncover those insights that you wouldn't necessarily get from a typical interview. A lot of times people don't even realize they've developed these little workarounds or that they're making these subconscious decisions. Diary studies can really bring those hidden patterns to light.
Oh, that makes sense. It's kind of like when you're watching someone use your product and you realize they're doing something you totally didn't expect. Those aha moments.
Exactly. And those unexpected behaviors can actually lead to some of the most valuable insights for improving your product or service. The key is to provide clear instructions and, like prompts for your participants so you make sure they're actually capturing the info that's most relevant to your research goals.
This seems like such a great way to understand user behavior in a way that's more authentic and actually relevant to their real lives.
It is. And surprisingly, they're not that hard to set up. You can use simple tools like Google Docs or even, good old-fashioned pen and paper to collect their entries. The most important thing is to find a method that works for your participants and makes it easy for them to share their experiences.
Okay, diary studies are officially on my to-do list. What other cool methods do you have in store for us?
All right, let's switch gears and talk about ethnographic research. Imagine you're an anthropologist studying a brand new culture. You're immersing yourself in their world, observing their behaviors, their rituals, how they interact with each other, all to understand their way of life.
That sounds incredible, but how does that translate to UX research?
Well, in UX research, you're kind of treating your users like a separate culture. You're not just asking them questions in some formal setting. You're going out and observing them in their natural environment, whether that's their home, their workplace, or even, a coffee shop.
Oh, I see. So instead of bringing users into a lab, you're going into their world to see how they actually live and work.
You got it. And that's where the real magic of ethnographic research happens. By seeing them in their natural environment, you get this much deeper understanding of the context in which they use your product or service. You see the challenges they face, the workarounds they create, and those unmet needs that they might not even be aware of.
That's such a powerful concept. It's like understanding the whole ecosystem that your product lives in.
Exactly. And that can lead to some truly innovative design solutions that really address the needs of your users.
Can you give us an example of how ethnographic research has actually been used to improve a product or service?
Sure. Let's say you're designing a new CRM system for a bank. Instead of just, interviewing bank employees about what they need, you actually go and spend time observing them in their workplace. You see how they're interacting with customers, how they're using the systems they already have, and what kinds of problems they run into throughout the day.
So you're getting a first-hand look at the real challenges they're facing, not just some idealized version of how they think things should work.
Exactly. And having that kind of deep understanding of their context can be super valuable when you're designing something like a CRM system that really needs to meet the specific needs of those employees and make them more efficient and productive.
Okay, you've convinced me. Ethnographic research sounds like a game changer for understanding the whole user experience.
It is. And while it can take a bit more time and resources than other methods, the insights you get are totally worth it, especially for more complex products or services.
Okay, let's move on to some of those techie methods you mentioned before, mouse tracking and eye tracking. Those sound super high-tech. What are they all about?
Well, these methods are kind of like having superpowers for understanding how people interact with, digital stuff.
Yeah.
You can actually track their eye movements and where they're clicking, which tells you what's grabbing their attention, where they're getting stuck, and what they might be missing.
So it's like you're seeing the digital world through their eyes.
In a way, yeah. Eye tracking especially lets you see how people are visually scanning a page, what elements they focus on, how long they look at different areas, and so on. It's super helpful for things like website design and usability testing.
You can see what's confusing them, make the navigation easier, and make sure that the important stuff is easy to find.
Exactly. And mouse tracking works really well with eye tracking because it gives you more data on how people are interacting. You can see exactly where they're clicking, how long they hover over things, and whether their mouse movements are matching up with their eye movements.
I bet you can find some interesting differences between what people say they do when they actually do.
All the time. People often aren't even aware of their own behavior, so mouse tracking and eye tracking give you that objective data that can challenge those assumptions and help you make better design decisions.
So you can find those hidden usability problems that are probably frustrating your users without them even realizing it.
Exactly. And the best part is there are all kinds of tools out there that make it easy to do these studies remotely. You don't need any fancy lab or expensive equipment to get started.
That's great. These methods sound like powerful tools for really optimizing the user experience.
They are, and you can use them for all sorts of digital products and services, websites, apps, online stores, software, you name it.
Okay, let's move on to a classic UX research method that you mentioned earlier, interviews. What makes interviews so valuable in UX research?
Interviews are like the bread and butter of qualitative research. They give you a way to have these direct conversations with your users, to really understand their point of view and get those rich, detailed insights into their needs and what motivates them.
It's like having a one-on-one chat with your target audience, really getting to know them on a deeper level.
You got it. And that personal connection can be super valuable. Interviews let you dive into topics in more depth, ask follow-up questions, and go way beyond those simple yes or no answers you might get from a survey.
I imagine it can be a little tricky to conduct effective interviews, though. What are some things to keep in mind?
You're right. Conducting those really insightful interviews takes practice. One of the most important things is to make sure your participants feel comfortable and safe, like they can really be themselves and share their honest thoughts without judgment.
So it's about building that connection and trust so they feel like they can really open up and share their honest thoughts and feelings.
Exactly. And the guide we're talking about from Eleken, it really stresses the importance of going beyond those simple yes or no questions. They actually give you these 5 golden rules for creating really great interview questions that lead to more thoughtful and interesting answers.
5 golden rules. Okay, I'm all ears. Tell me more.
All right, so these rules are all about asking those open-ended questions that encourage people to share their experiences and their point of view in their own words. The first rule is all about knowing your audience and tailoring your questions accordingly. Like, if you're interviewing someone who isn't super tech savvy, you don't want to use all kinds of jargon or technical terms, right?
Makes sense. You want to use language that they understand and feel comfortable with. What's the second rule?
Rule number 2 is to go for those open-ended questions that encourage longer answers and richer insights. For example, instead of asking, do you use habit tracking apps? You could ask, tell me about your experiences with tracking your habits.
Oh, I see. That's so much more engaging and insightful. It really invites them to share their personal experiences and thoughts.
Exactly. Okay, rule number 3, use neutral words and avoid making value judgments. For instance, instead of asking, was the X feature hard to find, which already kind of implies it was a bad experience, you could ask, describe your experience trying to find the X feature.
That's a really subtle but important distinction. You don't want to lead the witness and influence their answer. You want them to share their experience as objectively as possible.
Right. Now, rule number 4 might surprise you. Be careful with why questions. While it might seem like the most straightforward way to get someone to open up, it can actually make people feel defensive or put on the spot.
Oh, that's interesting. I wouldn't have thought of that.
So instead of asking, why did you click that button? You could say something like, what made you decide to click that button? Or what were you hoping to achieve by clicking that button?
So by rephrasing the question, you're encouraging a more thoughtful and less defensive response.
Exactly. And finally, rule number 5, always make sure your questions are actually aligned with the goals of your research. Remember, the point of the interview is to gather insights, not to just validate your own ideas. Be open to unexpected answers and be willing to change direction based on what you learn.
So it's about letting the interviewee lead the way and reveal those insights that you might not have anticipated.
That's it. By following these 5 golden rules, you can conduct UX research interviews that are both super insightful and engaging, leaving you with a much deeper understanding of your users and what they really need.
Okay, those are some great tips. I can see how those would really help you gather those richer, more nuanced insights.
Definitely. And the beauty of interviews is that you can use them at different stages of the research process. You can use them early on to explore user needs and pain points, or you can use them later on to get feedback on specific design solutions.
So they're like a multi-tool that you can use throughout the whole product development lifecycle.
Exactly. And they're one of the best ways to build empathy for your users and make sure you're designing stuff that really meets their needs.
Okay, we've covered interviews pretty thoroughly. What other UX research methods should we talk about?
Let's talk about surveys. They might seem a little old school, but they can be super helpful for gathering quantitative data from a larger group of people.
So if interviews are all about those deep, qualitative insights, surveys are more about getting a broader perspective on user behavior and preferences.
You got it. Surveys let you measure things like user satisfaction, identify trends, and get feedback on specific features or aspects of your product. and they're pretty easy to create and send out, especially with all the online tools available like Google Forms or SurveyMonkey.
Oh yeah, I've definitely used those before. But I imagine there's an art to crafting those survey questions. What are some key things to keep in mind?
You're right. Writing clear and concise survey questions is super important for getting accurate and helpful data. One of the biggest things is to keep your survey short and to the point.
So don't overwhelm people with a million questions.
Exactly. People are way more likely to finish a shorter survey, and you'll get more reliable data if they're not feeling tired or rushed.
That makes sense. What other tips do you have for designing good surveys?
Another important tip is to use a variety of question types to get different kinds of data. You can use multiple choice, rating scales, open-ended questions, and even demographic questions to get a more well-rounded understanding of your audience.
So it's all about choosing the right type of question for the information you're trying to get.
Precisely. And don't forget about using clear and simple language. Avoid jargon or technical terms that your audience might not understand.
Those are great tips. I feel much more confident about creating surveys now.
I'm glad to hear it. And remember, surveys can be a great way to gather both quantitative and qualitative data. You can use them to measure things like user satisfaction and identify trends, but you can also use them to get feedback on specific features or ask open-ended questions that let people share their thoughts and experiences in their own words.
Okay, surveys are definitely a versatile tool for UX research. What other methods should we explore?
Let's talk about focus groups. They're a really great way to gather qualitative data from a small group of people in a setting that's more interactive and conversational.
So it's kind of like a group interview where you can get different perspectives and insights on a specific topic.
Exactly. Focus groups let you explore user needs and feelings in a way that's more dynamic and nuanced. You can see how people are interacting with each other, how they respond to different prompts, and how their opinions might change throughout the discussion.
It sounds like a really good way to generate ideas and uncover those unexpected insights that you might not get from individual interviews.
It is. But it's important to note that focus groups need to be carefully planned and moderated to make sure that everyone feels comfortable sharing their thoughts and that the discussion stays focused and productive.
So it's not just about throwing a bunch of people in a room and letting them talk.
Right. Having a skilled moderator is really important for guiding the conversation, encouraging participation, and making sure the group stays on track. The moderator also plays a key role in creating a safe and respectful environment where everyone feels like they can share their honest opinions.
I can see how that would be crucial for getting valuable insights from a focus group.
Definitely. And while focus groups are traditionally done in person, they can also be done online using video conferencing tools.
Oh, that's great. That makes them more accessible and convenient, especially for remote teams or people who are in different locations.
Exactly. And while the virtual format can have its challenges, with the right planning and facilitation, online focus groups can be just as effective as in-person ones.
Okay, focus groups are definitely on my radar now. What other UX research methods should we talk about?
Let's talk about a method that's really helpful for understanding information architecture. Pre-testing. It's a great way to test how easy it is for people to find what they're looking for on your website or app.
So you're testing how easy it is for users to navigate and find the information they need.
Exactly. Imagine taking away all the visuals from your website or app, leaving just a plain text hierarchy of categories and subcategories. That's basically what tree testing is.
So you're testing the bare bones of your website without all the visual distractions.
Exactly. You give users this simplified structure and ask them to find specific information. By watching how they navigate through the tree, you can identify any problems with the navigation or any areas that are causing confusion.
That sounds like a really helpful method for making sure that the information on your website or app is organized well and easy to find.
It is. And tree testing is a pretty straightforward method that can be done both online and offline. There are lots of online tools that make it super easy to create and run tree tests remotely.
That's awesome. I can see how this would be a valuable tool for anyone who is involved in website design or content organization.
It definitely is. And the insights you get from tree testing can lead to significant improvements in the user experience, making it much easier for people to find the information they need and do what they came to do.
Okay, tree testing is officially on my list of things to try. What other UX research methods should we explore?
Let's talk about a method that's often overlooked but super valuable, especially in the early stages of product development: competitor analysis.
So we're talking about researching your competition, right? Why is that so important for UX research?
Well, understanding your competitors is essential for making sure your product actually fits into the market. By studying what they're doing well and where they're falling short, you can find those unmet needs in the market and position your product in a way that fills those gaps.
So it's not about copying your competitors, it's about learning from them and finding ways to make your product stand out and offer a better user experience.
You got it. Competitor analysis can give you a ton of valuable insights into what users expect, what the current trends are, and what the best practices are in your industry. It can also help you avoid potential pitfalls and find new opportunities to innovate.
Can you give us an example of how competitor analysis might inform the design of a new product?
Absolutely. Let's say you're developing a new fitness app. By doing your research on the competition, you might discover that most existing apps are all about intense workouts and calorie counting. But there's a real need for an app that focuses more on mindful movement and stress reduction.
So by understanding what your competitors are offering, you can figure out what makes your product unique and target a specific audience that has unmet needs.
Exactly. Competitor analysis can be a really powerful tool for shaping your product strategy and making sure that what you're offering really stands out in a crowded market.
Okay, I'm sold.
Right.
Competitor analysis is definitely on my radar now. What other UX research methods should we look into?
Let's talk about usability testing. It's one of the most fundamental methods for evaluating how easy your product is to use and finding any usability issues that might be frustrating your users.
So you're basically watching people as they're using your product, looking for any points where they get stuck or anything that's confusing them.
Exactly. Usability testing lets you really understand your users by directly observing them and talking to them. You can see exactly where they get stuck, what features they find confusing, and how they approach different tasks.
I can imagine that's incredibly insightful, especially when you're designing something complex like a website or a piece of software.
It definitely is. And you can do usability testing at various stages of development. You can use it early on to test the usability of wireframes or prototypes, or later on to evaluate the usability of the actual finished product.
So it's a great way to catch usability problems early on and make sure that your product is easy and enjoyable to use.
Exactly. And the great thing about usability testing is that you don't need a ton of participants to get valuable insights.
That's great news for smaller teams or companies with limited resources.
For sure. And there are all sorts of methods and tools available for doing usability testing, from simple observation techniques to more sophisticated eye-tracking software.
Okay, usability testing is definitely a must-have for any UX researcher. What other methods are out there?
Let's talk about A/B testing, which is a super powerful method for comparing two versions of something and seeing which one performs better.
So you're basically running an experiment to see which design is more effective.
Exactly. With A/B testing, you randomly assign users to either version A or version B, and then track their behavior to see which version leads to more conversions, more engagement, or whatever outcomes you're looking for.
That sounds like a really data-driven way to optimize the user experience.
It is. A/B testing takes out all the guesswork and helps you make informed decisions based on actual user behavior.
Can you give us an example of how A/B testing could be used to improve a website?
Sure. Let's say you're trying to get more people to click on a call to action button on your website. You could create two versions of the button, one with blue text and one with orange text, and then run an A/B test to see which color performs better.
So you're testing a very specific element of your design to see which version resonates better with your users.
Exactly. And by looking at the data from the A/B test, you can see which color is actually more effective at driving clicks and conversions.
That's a great example. I can see how A/B testing would be super useful for optimizing all sorts of things on a website.
Definitely. And the best part is that A/B testing is pretty easy to set up, especially with all the A/B testing tools available online. You can test everything from button colors and headlines to images and layouts.
Okay, A/B testing is officially on my list of methods to try. We've covered so many UX research methods today, from diary studies to A/B testing. What are the main takeaways you want our listeners to remember?
Well, I think the most important takeaway is that UX research is this really diverse field with a ton of different methods and tools. The trick is to figure out which methods are the best fit for your goals and what stage you're at in the development process. There's no one-size-fits-all approach.
So it's about being flexible and using the methods that make the most sense for the situation.
Exactly. And another important takeaway is that UX research is an ongoing process. It's not something you do just once and then forget about. By constantly getting feedback from your users and using that feedback to improve your design process, you can make sure that your product is really meeting their needs and exceeding their expectations.
So it's about building a culture of user centricity within your organization, where research is an integral part of everything you do.
You got it. And by really embracing UX research, you can create products and services that are not just functional and efficient, but actually delightful and engaging to use.
I think we've done a pretty good job of exploring the world of UX research today.
We've definitely dived deep. And honestly, we've just scratched the surface.
So true. There's always more to learn in this ever-evolving field. But for now, let's shift gears and talk about the real-world impact of UX research.
Okay, time to bridge the gap between theory and practice. We've covered the what and the how of UX research. Now let's talk about the why. Why should our listeners care about all of this? What's the real-world impact of UX research?
That's a great question. At the end of the day, UX research is all about creating better experiences for your users. Whether you're designing a website, developing an app, or even just writing an email, understanding your audience's needs and motivations can make a huge difference. It can be the difference between a product that just exists and one that people really connect with.
Absolutely. And the impact goes way beyond just happy users. UX research can lead to increased customer loyalty, a better reputation for your brand, and even a boost to your bottom line.
So it's not just a nice to have, it's something that every organization that wants to succeed needs to be thinking about.
Exactly. The guide we've been talking about from Eleken really highlights how UX research can lead to things like higher user satisfaction, more conversions, and ultimately a more successful product. It's about making decisions based on data that actually lead to tangible results.
So it's about finding that sweet spot where user needs and business goals align. It's a win-win.
Exactly. And the beauty of UX research is that you can apply to so many different industries and contexts. Whether you're in tech, healthcare, finance, or anything else, understanding your users is crucial for success.
So it's not just for designers and developers, it's a valuable skill for anyone who's involved in creating products, services, or experiences.
That's right. The insights you get from UX research can inform everything from marketing campaigns and product development to customer service and internal processes.
It's about putting the user at the heart of everything you do.
Exactly. And by taking that user-centered approach, you can create products and services that are not only functional and efficient, but also enjoyable and engaging to use.
I think we did a pretty good job of showing how impactful UX research can be.
I think so too. And I hope our listeners are feeling inspired to try out some of these methods and principles in their own work.
I know I am. But before we wrap up this deep dive, I want to touch on one more important point from the source.
Yeah.
Who is actually responsible for UX research?
That's a great question. It might be tempting to say, oh, that's the UX researcher's job. But in reality, UX research is everyone's responsibility.
So it's not about putting research in its own little silo, it's about integrating it into the whole organization.
Exactly. Like at Elken, their product designers are experts in both design A&D research, which makes sure they're taking a holistic approach.
Yeah.
It's about breaking down those silos and creating a culture of collaboration where everyone feels like they can contribute to the user experience.
So from the executives who decide how to allocate resources to the developers who are actually building the product, everyone has a role to play in making sure that the product meets the needs of the users.
Exactly. And that shared responsibility is key to building an organization that's truly user-centered.
Okay, you've convinced me. UX research is a total game changer, and it's something that everyone should be thinking about no matter what their role is or what industry they're in.
Absolutely. It's all about embracing a mindset of continuous learning and improvement, always trying to understand your users better and create experiences that they truly love.
All right, before we wrap up, let's give our listeners a final thought to chew on. What's the one thing you want them to take away from this deep dive?
I think the most important thing to remember is that UX research is a journey, not a destination. It's about constantly learning, trying new things, and adapting. Don't be afraid to experiment, make mistakes, and most importantly, listen to your users. Their feedback is the most valuable thing you have.
So it's all about embracing the fact that design is an iterative process and being open to feedback and change.
Exactly. And remember, those really valuable insights often come from the most unexpected places. Be open to being surprised, question those assumptions, and be willing to change course based on what you learn from your users.
Those are some wise words. As we wrap up this deep dive, I want to challenge our listeners to think about how they can apply what they've learned to their own work and lives. What's one area where you could start using UX research principles? What's one question you could ask your users to get a better understanding of what they need? The possibilities are endless.
Wow, we've really covered a ton of ground in this deep dive into UX research. We've gone from the basics to some pretty complex stuff, and it's clear that UX research isn't just for designers anymore.
Nope, not at all. It's something anyone can use to create better experiences, whether it's for your customers, clients, or even your coworkers. And the best part is, you don't need some fancy degree or a huge budget to get started. You can start applying these UX research principles today. All you need is a little curiosity and a willingness to actually listen.
That is so true. So speaking of getting started, what are some easy things that our listeners can do to start incorporating UX research into their own work, or even their personal lives? Well, one of the simplest things is to just start observing. Pay attention to how people are interacting with the products and services you use every day. Like, what are their pain points? What kind of workarounds are they using? What are those aha moments? Just observing those things can give you some really valuable insights that you can use to improve your own work.
I love that. It's about being more aware of the experiences we're creating and the ones we're experiencing ourselves.
Exactly. Another easy thing to do is to just start asking questions. Don't be afraid to reach out to your users, customers, or even your colleagues and just ask them about their experiences. Like, what do they love? What drives them crazy? What would they change? You might be surprised by what you hear.
Sometimes the best insights come from just asking a simple question.
Right. And don't forget about feedback. That's gold. Encourage people to share their thoughts and suggestions, whether it's through surveys, feedback forms, or even just chatting with them. The more feedback you get, the better you'll understand your audience and what they need.
So it's about creating this culture of feedback where people feel comfortable being honest and sharing their opinions, even if it's not always positive.
Exactly. And you don't have to take every single suggestion to heart, but each piece of feedback is a chance to learn and grow.
It's all about constantly iterating and improving.
You got it. And as you start incorporating those UX research principles into your work, you'll probably find that it becomes second nature. You'll start seeing the world through a user-centric lens, always thinking about how to make those experiences not just functional, but also enjoyable and engaging.
I think that's a perfect note to end on. We've explored a lot today, from the fundamentals of UX research to some pretty advanced ideas, and I hope our listeners are feeling empowered to start putting what they've learned into action.
I hope so too. And remember, UX research is a journey, not a destination. There's always something new to learn and explore in this field. But by focusing on your users and always striving to improve, you can create products and services that really make a difference in the world.
Well said. Thanks for joining me on this deep dive into the amazing world of UX research.
It was my pleasure.
And to our listeners, keep those questions coming and stay curious. Until next time, happy researching.